Hello and welcome to this presentation where we're going to be looking at how you can protect your information using Azure Information Protection. My name is Anthony Charman. I'm a business consultant at Computer World. So I work alongside the Microsoft team, helping organizations that we work with to embed the Microsoft technologies into their organizations, because as I constantly say to people, integrating these kind of things into your organization is a business project and not just a technology project. I'm going to start by kind of just remembering the past. So in the old days, information within an organization was kind of held within the organization. Before computers, then you'd have a storeroom, a kind of a safe room where you keep all your company ledgers, and they'd be locked away in the evenings, and you get them out in the day when you needed to use them. Then when we moved into the kind of traditional IT world, servers were locked in a room. They held all your information. They were locked in your room. The applications that you're running within your business were running on hardware that was owned by the organization, and all your clients were connected by cables and wires into the organization directly kind of to the back of the computer. And all your access permissions and things like that were managed on your premises. Any external connections, when the internet came along and you bought a connection to the internet, you'd put a firewall on there to ensure that information that was coming in and out of the organization via that link was secure, and you'd put email and web filters in place to manage that. So you in effect built this castle, this fortress around the information that your organization was using, and that was how you kept it safe. Things, however, have changed. This would be a typical digital workplace. In the early days of computing, you'd have a single VDU, or you'd have a single PC sat on your desk that would be directly connected to your server room, and that would be the only way that you access that information. And therefore, when you went home at night and they locked the door on the office, everything was secure. But then this happened. Mobile phones with data capabilities, laptop devices, tablets, and cloud-based applications. And when they came along, they kind of changed everything about security, because you now had the ability to store data on a laptop, take it out of the office, leave it on a train, and for people to be able to access that information. And we now had data stored in cloud-based applications, not just within our organization. So here's one of my favorite slides. This is the Clifton suspension bridge. I think I've used this slide on the majority of my presentations, and we're using it here to represent this kind of transition from the client-server era, which is the traditional computing environment, and across the other side of the bridge, the cloud era. And I think when we started using this slide a few years ago, we were kind of saying we're about a third of the way across the bridge. We're moving from a traditional environment with on-premises servers to a cloud-based environment with SaaS applications and mobile devices. I think the advent of coronavirus has really accelerated that journey for us. And lots of organizations are now kind of a long way across that bridge, certainly well past the halfway mark, and moving to an environment where a lot of our data is being held in the cloud. So this cloud era, as I said, we've got this information. Some of it still held on premises, some of it held in public or private data centers. We've got some of our core business applications running in the cloud. We've got information held on various devices, sometimes PCs that are within the office, but more often or not, remote connections out to laptops and tablets. And we've got a phenomenal amount of information just held on our mobile devices and telephones. And our employees need it. They need to be able to access that information wherever they are. And the coronavirus lockdown has shown the real benefits of that and has really accelerated that process, in that most of us are able to continue to work from home in a very similar way to the way we've been working within the offices. And those devices connect to the internet first. They don't connect via our server rooms anymore. They're not channeled through an on-site access control unit. They go to the internet first, and that's where they're doing their identity management. So there's a challenge here. Our organisations need access to the company's information more than ever. I think the first place I heard this phrase that data is the fuel for innovation was at a VMware conference. I think it's when I Googled it earlier, it's been used by numerous organisations, so I don't know where it came from originally. But a lot of what's happening within our organisations is based on the data that we have. Data and information within our organisations is giving organisations significant competitive advantage at the moment. And alongside that, opposing that, is this increase in cyber risk. The fact that if people can get hold of our information, they're getting hold of our competitive advantage and our intellectual property, and there's more and more of that risk going on. And also there's increase in data regulation. So there's now quite often monetary fines in place for us losing data, especially when it comes to things like GDPR, where we have this responsibility for personal identified information that can lead to individuals and enable people to get access to individuals. So we need some tools to help us protect that information, and the old tools are no longer relevant. Putting a firewall in place is still a good idea, but when most of your data is outside of your organization already and your employees are working from outside the organization, not a lot of information is going to be caught by that firewall. And that's where Azure Information Protection comes into play, because what it does is enable us to identify the information within our organization, identify the documents and emails, and give them tags. And these are what Microsoft refer to as sensitivity labels, which identify how important that information is to us and what category that information falls into. And these sensitivity labels are actually embedded in the individual documents and files within our environment, and they stay there. So if I send a Word document which has got a tag in it from myself on my mobile phone to a colleague or a client on my mobile phone, that tag goes with it in the metadata, and the applications that whoever I've sent that to respect what is in that metadata. So if I've sent it as highly confidential and I've sent it with a set of rules that say it can't be forwarded to anyone else, it's encrypted, you can't print it, then the applications that my user's using will also respect those things. So I've got full control over how that data can be used when it's received by a client. So we embed these labels into the files, and then we set a set of rules which enable us to kind of tell the applications how to treat those files and protect those files in certain circumstances. I've just on the slide there listed a few of the things we can do. So we can stop emails being forwarded within particular categories. We can apply users restrictions so that only users from certain groups or from certain organizations can access those. We can encrypt the data so that wherever it goes, nobody can get access to it unless they've got permission. And we can do simple things like disable printing, make a document read-only, or retrospectively revoke access to a document. Those features are provided by the Azure Rights Management Service. So it's that element of it, the part that's sat up in Azure, which is making sure that those documents, the people who are accessing those documents, have the right permissions to do that. So there's a number of steps that we need to go through when we set up Azure Information Protection within an organization. And a lot of these aren't technology steps. These are actually business steps. So the first thing we need to do is to classify the information within our organization. We need to break it into groups, the groups that we want to apply different levels of security and different levels of control over. So we need to look at an organization's data as a whole and decide which groups we're going to break it into. I've put some examples there, commercially confidential, client confidential, internal only, personal data, but each organization will have a completely different set of priorities around the data and how they want to protect it. What I would say is, one of the lessons you learn very early on in an Azure Information Protection project is not to be too ambitious around this. I think 3 categories is a good start. 5, I would think, is a maximum that you should look at. If you get carried away, then it becomes a very difficult concept for the users to allocate the right category to the data, and they tend to just ignore it, and the implementation isn't effective. Once we've identified the categories of information, we need to agree the scope of control that we want over that. And Azure Information Protection can cover Office files, emails, but it can also cover stuff held within the Microsoft containers, within Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive. So we can add sensitivity labels to a particular team within the Microsoft Teams environment, and all of the content within that team will adopt that level of security. And it also extends out into Azure databases, SQL databases in Azure, and into Azure Blob Storage. And also, of course, we've got to think about what's happening within our on-premises file stores. Unfortunately, Azure Information Protection can extend into those stores as well, because many of us have still got a lot of information held on site. The next thing that we need to do is think about each of those categories and create a control policy for each of those sensitivity labels and decide what we need to do in that circumstance. If it's a highly confidential one, then we're liable to enforce encryption and put a lot of control over how those, who can access those documents, which groups of people, and we're liable to make sure that information like that has got mandatory control on it. If it was something more simple, like a internal classification for design documents, which may have a bit of IP in there, we may want to make sure that we've got content marking on those documents, but not control them as much as we would a highly confidential document. So once we've decided on those labels and we've created a control policy for those labels, we need to think about how we're going to apply them to our data. New data that's been created, say I was creating a new Word document today, when I go to save that document, the Azure client Information Protection client would ask me how I want to categorize that data and give me the choice of how I do that. So we can actually apply those sensitivity labels manually to information as we create it. But of course, we've already got lots of information within our organization that needs to be labeled. So we can use auto labeling for things like that. So we can set a set of criteria around each label. So something that maybe contains a credit card or personally identifiable information, or certain keywords, maybe names of things like competitors' products. We can build rules into the automatic labeling client, and we can send that away to go and identify those documents and label those appropriately. We can also build those rules into the manual process as well. So as we're creating an email to send to someone, if we want to identify whether there's a credit card number in there, then the client can do that. And it can, when we go to save that document or send that email, it will say the minimum category that I'm allowing you to send this with is financial data or confidential data, because it contains a credit card number. So there's kind of automatic checks even when you're manually sending information. And the other area we can apply the labeling automatically is on-premises servers. So we can use the Azure Information Protection Unified Labeling Scanner to run through our existing data stores and categorize that information. So there we are. Once we have those bits in place, we're ready to start the deployment of the environment. But what we need to do is not just turn it on straight away and let it get on with it. Fortunately, within Azure Information Protection, we can put it into a kind of test mode, a discovery mode, where it will run in the background, where it'll tell us all the information and all the decisions that it was going to make, but not actually enforce any of the protection and policing on the data. It's really important to do that, because at the beginning of a project, when we first turn it on, experience has shown that we'll get so many false negatives, so many areas of the business that are sending stuff that might look like a credit card number, or might look like important information that we need to adjust because it's not that. So once we turn the environment on, and we leave it in discovery mode to start with. We start to look at the reports that come from it, and then they all arrive in the Microsoft kind of compliance dashboard, so we can see how things are going. We can monitor those alerts and then tune the policies to make sure that we're not getting too many false negatives. At this point, we also need to start working with the users and the end users to train them on how to use this new solution, because every time they're sending an email, every time they're saving a document, it's going to come and challenge them and say, what category do you want to put this in, and potentially advise them on which category that it should go into. And they might be in a situation where they're regularly sending emails with what's potentially confidential information out to partners, etc. And we need to make sure that if that's an appropriate use of that information and that's appropriate to the relationship they have with the partner, then it doesn't. The Azure Information Protection doesn't interfere with that. So turning on discovery mode, running the environment for an extended period of time, monitoring what the outputs from it are, training the end users, and tuning the policies so we're not getting those false negatives is really important before we finally get to the point where we activate that protection. And at that point as well, we also need to be able to continue to monitor those alerts for two reasons. One, to tune out any more false negatives, but also, secondly, to take appropriate action if they are valid alerts, and if people are trying to send inappropriate information outside of the organization. So that then we move into the kind of business as usual scenario in the security monitoring of the environment. So that's really a nice overview of Azure Information Protection. In summary, yeah, I think this is the challenge that we have, that to get the maximum benefit out of the information in our organization, it now needs to be able to, the users need to be able to get hold of that information whenever they need it and where they need it. But also you've got this, the other side of the coin, in that we need to make sure the information's protected from an unauthorized access. And Azure Information Protection enables us to do that by embedding those labels in which travel with the data, and by the applications that people are using to access that information are respecting that information and that level of protection. Just in summary, from experience, these kind of Azure Information Protection projects need really careful planning. You need to know the data within your organization. You need to involve the stakeholders who know exactly what that information means to the organization, where it travels to, and what needs to be stopped and what needs to be allowed to enable the organization to function successfully. You'll need the involvement of the business throughout the whole of the project. And the kind of one of the most important points is designing and delivering that user training and thinking about the user experience throughout the whole project to make it as easy as possible, but give you the highest level of protection possible. And then that ongoing tuning and monitoring is an essential part of it to make sure that the system is working effectively for you. If you've learned things today, and if you want to know more about Microsoft 365 information protection and how we can implement AIP and other technologies within your organization, then do scan the QR code on the screen there, and we can set up a meeting and come and talk to you about how the solutions can be deployed and how we can improve your data protection within the organization without locking your data away from the people who need to use it. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you're enjoying today and the whole of the conference, and look forward to meeting at some point. Thank you.